All right, I think we'll get started. I feel like for those of you who have been to a parent coffee before that I'm standing down the hall watching parents, come on into the building. So I'm watching our numbers kind of increase on our attendees, but I think we'll get started for the evening. We have a lot of information to cover. So first off, I just want to thank everybody so much for joining us tonight on our first ever parent Zoom. This certainly is new to us, so please bear with us as we use this technology tonight. We've never done this before. We've learned a lot about Zoom for individual student meetings and some small groups over the past couple months, but never for an event quite like this where we had over 100 parents register. So again, this is all new to us. My understanding is that you can see all of us, but we cannot see you. We see your name in the attendees column to our right. So I'm hoping that everybody can hear us okay. And I'm hoping I won't have a problem sharing my screen or anything, but again, just bear with us as we learn this technology tonight. This certainly has been a challenging time for everybody. This is all new territory for us, but it's certainly been challenging on so many levels. And for you parents, the junior parents, I know this is really a concerning time and a lot of worry out there about what the impact this pandemic is going to have on college admissions for your sons and daughters. So before the summer months, we wanted to offer this Zoom tonight to try to answer any questions and provide some insight on the information that we're hearing from the colleges. So I'm going to share my screen and share the PowerPoint that we have put together for this evening. So our agenda for the evening, here we go. So to start off, hopefully at this point, everybody knows who their counselor is and who they're working with. For everybody on Mrs. Mahoney's caseload, I know you've all received notification that Mrs. Mahoney is relocating to New Jersey. She's actually there now and working for us through the rest of the school year. But we were really, as sad as we are to lose Mrs. Mahoney, we're really excited that Elise DeLuzio is returning to Medfield High School. Mrs. DeLuzio covered for Kathy's maternity leave last spring. So she's very familiar with many of your students. So we're really excited to have her back next year. So our agenda for this evening, over the past couple of weeks, we have put together video clips that we've shared with your sons and daughters about different topics related to future planning, including application deadlines, different types of applications, recommendations, essays, the impact on COVID-19, next steps, responsibilities, and so forth. We've sent these videos out in our guidance new and updates that we share every week with students. And we recognize that although, we find this information is really helpful for our students right now in this whole world of remote learning and everything that our students have going on, that it has been hard for students to do a little bit of the extra stuff that guidance typically asks of students in spring of their junior year. So therefore, we wanted to share this information with you folks tonight so that way you had it as well. Also, every year we typically offer a parent coffee, a junior parent coffee. So this is kind of in lieu of that. But we always find it important to get some advice and some feedback from our senior parents to pass along to you folks, the junior parents. So we did that as well. And the senior parents gave us pages and pages of advice and information for you. So which was great. And we're going to go over some of that tonight as well. So we've really been trying to stay on top of the information that the colleges are sharing with high school counselors about what to expect next year. I personally have attended 2 different webinars, one by the Holy Cross Admissions Office, and then another webinar that included admissions reps from Boston College, Tulane, and Vanderbilt. And it's been really helpful to hear exactly what the college representatives are putting out to high school guidance counselors, parents, and students. Many of the schools have expressed that their intent is to open their doors in the fall for in-person, in-class college in the fall. But the reality is that nobody really knows yet. This is really day to day, week to week, month to month. So they may plan for one thing and then have to make adjustments as they move forward. Well, with that, one of the questions that has come up in both webinars I attended and several times on the RSVP for this particular program was, what will the impact of deferrals and gap years have from the 2020 class on the class of 2021? And the college admissions reps were really great in really feeling like that's a misconception out there that deferrals and gap years will really increase. They felt strongly that gap year deferrals are for enrichment, so for travel, for service, not for COVID-19. So they don't anticipate that their deferral numbers or their gap year numbers will really increase all that much. Certainly, like Tulane mentioned, they're not planning to increase at all. So if students don't want to attend Tulane in the fall, that's totally fine. They don't have to, but at the same time, they won't be granted a deferral for the year. As I mentioned, that the colleges really intend to be conservative with that. It's always helpful to hear from the colleges to just provide some perspective, to hear what they're thinking. This whole process is new to everyone on the high school side, certainly, but certainly at the college level as well. So they're learning through this just as we are. The colleges report that they know that this is hard for everybody, and they're not expecting students to do anything spectacular during this stay-at-home pandemic. They're not expecting anyone to start a nonprofit from their home. They're just thinking about what this looks like, the impact of the students' life and how they're spending their time. And that's really no different than the admissions cycle in previous years. Colleges want to know how students are spending their time. So, if a student during the pandemic or any other time is, playing video games all day long, that's one thing. But if students are really, taking a responsibility at home or looking at different personal development opportunities, they're expecting that. The college applications really cover all 4 years of high school. So the colleges are looking at this as one term of high school. So, a question came up in one of the webinars, if my student hadn't lost their spring sport opportunity, what impact will that have? And they were really like, it's really not going to have an impact. Everybody lost their spring sport opportunity. So it's not that just you didn't play baseball or softball or whatever the case might be during the spring. Everybody lost that opportunity. So I think it's just important to keep that in mind, that this pandemic right now is really just a one term of high school. I know it feels very long, like we've been home for a very, very long time. At least I feel that way. But I think when we start submitting applications out to colleges next fall, they're going to look at the whole picture of your student's journey through high school. And one of the quotes, it's pretty close to an exact quote, but my favorite part that the Boston College rep says, there's no expectation that you need to put a rosy perspective on this situation. Everybody knows it's been bad. And we'll talk a little bit further how the Common App has changed and a question on their application about the COVID-19 pandemic. So my biggest takeaway from the webinars that I participated in is they really want students to be involved in this process. So again, even though we're all home and we're not able to go to college fairs or meet with admissions reps that come in and so forth, they're still looking for students to get involved. College reps really miss talking to students right now. They love talking about their school. They love talking to high school students, and they're really missing that. So they're trying to get creative with what they can offer for virtual offerings as well. I know Holy Cross and both Salve Regina, we heard that they're offering essay writing workshops and interview workshops. Many schools out there are offering virtual tours by students that go to those schools. Tulane mentioned that they're offering coffee chats with admissions counselors. I think the most important thing to know, though, is it's important for the students and you folks to check the websites regularly of the schools that you're interested in to find out what those virtual offerings look like. For many students that may have signed up or have visited a school before and the school has their email address, they may get email updates about these offerings, but it's really important to kind of go back, go to the websites, weekly, you know, take a look at what some of these virtual offerings are, and sign up for some of them, see what they have out there, because it is the best way for colleges to connect students right now. So with that, I'm actually going to turn our program over to Ann Lodge to kind of take it off from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. And welcome to all the parents. I wish I could see you all and see your faces, but I'm glad to know that you're on the other end of this webinar. I just wanted to share a little bit of information that we shared with your students in the first Screencastify that we sent to them through the Guidance News and Updates a couple of weeks ago. Just to sort of kick off things as a reminder of what we had done with them in the classrooms back in December. Feels like a really long time ago at this point. We wanted to share with them some of the resources that are available to them as they are navigating this search process. When we kicked things off in December in the classroom, some of them were ready, some of them had already started, and some weren't close to it at that point in time. And at this point, with a little bit more downtime, I think it's much more present in people's minds, thinking about those next steps and what it's going to look like. So one of the most important places that we tend to go to in Medfield that helps a lot in this search process is the Naviance program. So for those of you who came to our in-person junior parent night back earlier in the year, you might recall that I shared a lot of information at that point with all of you about Naviance and its capabilities. And it's something that we're using, again, still remotely and continuing to communicate with the students that they can do college searches through Naviance and save them so they have access to them and their guidance counselor has access to them as well. They can view the scattergrams so they can see the application history from Medfield applicants who've applied to particular schools to see how they've fared in the admission process. And as they're beginning to sort of dive a little bit more deeper into what those future plans look like, if they have any interest in figuring a little bit more out about a potential major that could lead to a career, they can always revisit that information in a section of Naviance as well under a careers tab in there. We had done some of that with the sophomores back in, students back when they were sophomores, but they always have access to that information as they're navigating the process. The College Board has a great website, ACT has a great website, and certainly the college's own admission pages, especially now since you don't have access to visit the schools in person. They are great resources and offering a ton of information to students and their families as you continue to navigate this process. Go ahead, Stephanie. Slide. Thank you. So one of the other things that we started talking about was to sort of delve in now to the nuts and bolts of what the application process actually looks like for students. So one of the things that we wanted to review with them are the different types of applications that they might encounter as they begin to put applications together next fall. The common application, which most of you have probably heard of, is certainly the most typical application and most common way that students will apply, but there's also something called the coalition application, and I'll go into depth on both of those a little bit further. There are always college-specific applications, and then occasionally you might hear about a VIP or a priority application. So the VIP or priority applications, I think, are the ones that are sort of most unique. They're also the most rare, and occasionally your son or daughter might end up receiving an email. Perhaps during these times they attend a webinar by a school, or maybe they've been flagged by their PSAT scores if they've chosen to connect with colleges after taking the PSAT. And the college might send them an application that says, hey, we noticed that you're interested. We think you might be a good fit. If you apply to our school, sometimes they waive the application fee, or occasionally they'll say the turnaround for the admission decision will be relatively quick. So occasionally those come across, but it's not something that's very, very common. Stephanie, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll share a little bit about the Common App, which most of you are probably most familiar with. The Common App is just one common application that is, I'm ahead of myself, I apologize. How will you know which application to use? Students should always defer to the website of the school for their application instructions and what they're looking for. Some colleges will accept either the Common App or the coalition application, or potentially their own application. And if they offer different ways in which you can apply, it genuinely does not matter to them which application you use, so long as you actually submit the application in its entirety. But always refer to the college's admission webpage to get the most up-to-date information. Slide. Now I'll jump back into where I was before, I apologize. But the Common Application itself is exactly what it says. It's a common application that's accepted by thousands of colleges across the United States. Students create one application that has information about their education, about their activities. There's a Common App essay, which we'll talk a little bit about further along in this slideshow. And all of that information is housed in this common application that can then be submitted to a number of different schools. If students want to get a head start on their application at this point in time, they can actually do so. They're able to create accounts now, selecting that they are a first-year student in the registration information section and noting that they would enter college in 2021. The Common App is updated every year, typically in early August. If they select their first-year student enrolling in 2021, their information will be rolled over from whatever they currently have in Common App when that new Common App is released in August. Slide. The coalition application is similar to the Common App, but it's on a smaller scale. It's an alternative to the Common App, and there's only about 140 colleges in the United States that accept the coalition application, although there are 3 colleges that will only use the coalition app. They won't accept anything other, and those are the University of Maryland, University of Florida, and University of Washington. So if your son or daughter is applying to any one of those schools, they will have to use the coalition app. But if they're applying to a school that takes both the coalition application and the common application, and they have to do the Common App for other schools, I would tell them to just stick with the Common App and make it a little bit easier for themselves in the process. Really, the one big difference between the coalition and the Common App is that the coalition has like a digital locker of sorts that students can house some of their records that they can ultimately share with colleges as they would like later on in the process. Go ahead, Stephanie. So as we sort of look at all of those different types of applications that are available to students, the other big piece of information we really wanted them to walk away with is some of the terminology around application deadlines. Every school seems to have a little bit of their own nuance as to what they're looking at when they give an application deadline and what it means for their particular school. But the 4 most common ones that you will likely hear about are early decision, early action, regular decision, and rolling admission. Early decision and early action are both pretty common, and they happen early on in the fall. So they generally have early October, November, or December admission deadlines. And then students receive a relatively quick turnaround time with the admission decision from the school. They'll receive some sort of a decision generally from mid-December to about mid-January. The difference is really between the two is that early decision is a binding commitment. So if a student is choosing to apply early decision to a college that offers it, they end up signing a contract. Actually, they have to sign it. You as a parent or a guardian needs to sign it, and the guidance counselor needs to sign it, saying that they understand that if they're admitted at this school, that they will attend. And that is generally regardless of financial aid packages that are put together. So it's a pretty big commitment, and it doesn't happen as commonly in the process. Early action tends to be a little bit more in people's sort of comfort zone, in that they still apply early, get an early admission decision. But if they're admitted, they still have until May 1st, which is the typical reply by date, in order to decide whether or not they attend that institution. So they have a little bit of time in the second half of the process to compare financial aid packages, see what schools they've been admitted to, and make a decision later on in the process. Regular decision is also non-binding, like early action, and generally those application deadlines are in early January to about mid-February. Students receive their admission decisions from colleges somewhere between about mid-March and early April, and then they have until May 1st to make a decision as to whether or not they'd like to attend a school if they're admitted. And then the rolling admission is something that's also non-binding, but applications are reviewed as they are received. So as they are processed, the admission representatives are making a decision on those applications, and the turnaround time can be anywhere from about 2 weeks to about 2 months. So it's a pretty quick turnaround time. The thing that's important to remember about that is that as it gets later and later in the year, more and more seats are filled in a class. So there are fewer and fewer spots available for applicants. So it might become a little bit more competitive in the process in the spring months of a rolling admission school. Before I hand things off to Kathy Mahoney for the next section, but any questions, Kathy, that I should be aware of? Good?
No questions.
Look good, so.
Yep.
All right, I'm gonna hand things over to Kathy Mahoney at this point.
All right. All right, so hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kathy Mahoney. I'm going to be talking about some of the pieces of the application. And I'll echo what Anne said. It's very strange not to be able to see you guys and be in the same room with you guys as we normally do this as a coffee, but I'm glad we're able to get this information to you. So the first piece that I'm going to talk about is the college essay. And when admissions counselors, when they're reading the essays from students, they're really looking to answer two questions. The first being, how well can the applicant write? So it is very important that students, that they proofread and edit their essays and make sure that, you know, they've caught any mistakes or anything like that, and have their parents, their teachers read with them, their guidance counselor. It's important for them to do that. The second thing that admissions counselors are looking to find out is any new information that they haven't already just found in other places in the application. This is not where we want students to rewrite their resume and list all their activities. They've done that elsewhere. There's a place for that in the Common App. And it also should really reflect the student's voice. So this is, you know, something I think that I've talked with parents about, and parents have kind of shared with me, is the temptation to kind of over edit their papers, their essays. And we really want this to come from the students, and the admissions counselors want to hear from the students. This is a really, really great place for students to share, you know, who they are and what really drives them, you know, what they find interesting or important. So we want this really to come from the students. So next slide. So the Common App have already published their questions for next year. They're the same questions that they've used for the past few years. So students, I'm not going to go through all of these because we're going to be sending this PowerPoint out to you. But students can start writing their essay now if they want to, or write it over the summer, so that when they come back to school in the fall, they might have a pretty good draft or maybe even a finished product, so that they don't have to do the essay while they're also doing schoolwork in the fall. So go to the next slide. One new thing that kind of came out of this pandemic, there is a COVID-19 specific question on the Common App. This is separate from your essay prompts. So students will write their normal essay, and in addition, if they would like to, basically a small essay, talking about how COVID-19 has affected them personally or academically, if there's anything they want to explain, this is the place to do it. The Common App didn't want to take away from the rest of the application and the rest of the student's high school experience, so they kind of created this separate piece of the application so that they could talk about anything they needed to talk about pandemic related here, and then save the rest of the application for all the other accomplishments that they've had throughout their high school. Go to the next slide. So there are plenty of places where students can go to get help on their essay. In the fall, they could sign up for the Writing Center and go talk to the teacher who's in there. They can either, sign up to meet one-on-one with them, or they can drop the paper off to be edited. So that's a really great resource, and a lot of our seniors do use that for their essay. Their English teacher is also a great resource because they know the student. Definitely, having the guidance counselor read it is great because we can kind of look at it from an admissions standpoint. And you as parents definitely are great help for the essay. You know your child best, and having that that extra set of eyes on the essay is a really great thing. We encourage students to have their peers read it, and also to read it out loud themselves. So lots of ways for help with the essay. So the next piece of the application is the resume. And we all know resume is sort of a snapshot of experiences. And this is for high school students. It's going to be from their time in high school, inside and outside of school, things that they've done. It's actually not required. It's not a required piece of the Common App. But there is a place where they can upload an additional piece of information. And if a student has a resume, I always encourage them to upload it there. When they're applying for scholarships, a resume is often required, and certainly for jobs and internships. So it's a good idea for students to start thinking about building a resume now if they don't already have one. We're not going to click on the link at the bottom, but when you get the PowerPoint, you can click on this link. It's goes to our guidance website, where we have a bunch of resume tips, examples, and graphic organizers for students to get started in compiling all the information that goes into the resume. Next slide. So the next piece or pieces of the application are the recommendations. And there's 2 recommendations that students are going to get. One is the teacher recommendation. So we have asked students to ask one teacher by the end of this year for a recommendation. Typically, colleges do like to see a teacher from junior year because it's the most recent version of them as a student. So, if a student doesn't think that a junior year teacher knows them well enough, I always encourage students to talk to your guidance counselor about that, and they can kind of work with you to either find a junior teacher, or maybe you do look for a teacher from sophomore year. We also recommend that it's from a core content area that's a full year class. So that way a teacher, they can really talk about a student's growth from the start of the school year in September all the way through the end of the school year. And really, I recommend to students that they don't necessarily pick the class or the teacher where they got the best grade in the class. That's not necessarily important. They want to pick a teacher who knows them well, who knows their work ethic, who can talk about, how they are, how they work with other students, potentially, overcoming challenges in the class. That's sort of the teacher that they want to look for. And some teachers require a teacher recommendation form for the students to fill out. I've linked that in here as well for students to find. Some teachers have their own form, so it's important to ask the teacher if they need any additional information in order to write the recommendation. Some teachers don't need that at all. So I would not recommend students just fill it out without checking with the teacher first. And then we always tell students to remember to thank their teachers after they have written the letter and they found out they're starting to hear back from colleges. And the next slide. So the second recommendation is going to be from the counselor's point of view. The counselor recommendation is different than the teacher recommendation because we can really write about the student in the context of their 4 years in high school, where the teacher is really focusing on that 1 year in the classroom. So in addition to academics, we're going to talk about extracurriculars, any leadership activities, out of school activities. This is a place where we can explain any situations that need explaining, such as any scheduling conflicts, things like that. So that's where the 2 differ. Students don't need to ask us to write that letter. We will write a letter for anyone who fills out the counselor recommendation form on Naviance. So we'll go to the next slide. So the counselor recommendation form, it is a place where students are able to really highlight what's important to them. And, you know, we know our students, but at the same time, it's impossible for us to know everything about all of our students. And sometimes a student has participated in something outside of school that maybe we've never talked about before. And it's really important to them. So this is really a place where a student can focus on those things, and then we can include them in the letter. And again, like I said before, that we can really help to shape unusual circumstances, such as maybe a scheduling conflict, or if there's a W on the transcript in a class, we can explain that here. To find the counselor recommendation form, obviously you got to log into Naviance. Under the About Me section, there is something for surveys, and there'll be a link to the counselor recommendation form. And that's open right now. So like the essay, this is something that students can get started with now and work on over the summer. It's something we definitely want students to take their time on. It's not something they'll be finished with in 5 minutes. We want them to really think about the answers to the questions so that we can really generate a good letter for them. And that is all I have for my section. And I think I'm going to be turning it over to Eric Ornberg.
Thanks, Mr. Mahoney. The only question that did come up was whether or not the COVID-19 question on the Common App was optional. And I did respond in the chat, and I just wanted to respond verbally too, that it is optional, and it's a limited 250-word response. So thank you for asking. Stephanie, if you could go to the next slide. So, hello, Warrior Nation. I hope everybody is doing well and everybody's healthy and their family is healthy. As I'm listening to this, I realize this is a tremendous amount of information that we are sending out to you folks. And this certainly takes a lot of time to process amid the pandemic. So this section that I'm going to talk about is a little bit about the impact COVID's had on admissions. And I think it's important that we realize that we are all in this together. This is not going to discriminate between public and private school kids, or, you know, urban settings and suburban settings. And I think we've got to get used to the terms that depends, time will tell, and we will see. We've encouraged the juniors to try to control the things that they can control, and understand too that the colleges and universities are evolving and refining what the admission cycle is going to look like. Almost on a daily basis, we're receiving emails from schools with updates. And I expect that's going to be accelerated through the summer months and well into the fall. We also encourage the juniors to use the 4 A's of awareness, adjustment, acclimation, and acceptance. This is the situation we're in, to be aware and to adjust one's course if need be, and to acclimate to the current climate. We have no idea what the start of school is going to look like, but we're certainly going to want to be able to adjust accordingly, not only for school, but for future planning. So in terms of standardized tests, one website I would direct people to, and we mentioned this back in January, is fairtest.org. There is a growing number of schools that are adding to the test optional list. I think it was 1,200, approximately 1,200 schools were test optional back in January, and that number has increased over the past couple of months. SAT has released their dates when they're going to offer the test: August 29th, the 26th, October 3rd, the 7th of November, and December 5th. Medfield High School plans on offering the SAT on the October 3rd deadline. And when I went on the College Board site today, they had mentioned that if you were taking the June SAT that was canceled, you should be getting an email this week, or the students may be getting an email this week with an opportunity to almost pre-register for some of these fall dates. And I will try to add that link specifically to this PowerPoint before we send it out. Next slide, Stephanie, please. The ACT continues. I have not heard word. They have been a little bit more quiet on the testing front than SAT has, but that scheduled date for June 13th, I believe, will be happening in some towns. I have not heard anything. The blurb that I've added here about during the week of May 26th students would be notified of test center closings. I took that off the ACT website today. It is the week of the 26th. We have heard of one family, I think, that's been adjusted from one test site to another test site in another part of Massachusetts, but I would double check your spam folders just to be in the loop on any changes if your student is registered for the June 13th ACT. And ACT is also mentioned that in the late fall of 2020, they may be trying to debut online testing at home. I'm not sure what late fall is, but these are the test dates and the deadlines for the ACTs in the fall. And I believe registration will not open until July of 2020 for those. And I would just precurse this by saying that as the AP coordinator, a lot of the College Board AP sites, SAT sites have crashed recently because of the volume of people that are going on them. So my recommendation would be to try to go onto those sites during non-working hours, either late at night or very early in the morning. That just has worked with past experiences. So the visits. This website, uvisit.com, is about as good as it gets right now when it comes to visiting schools. About a month ago, I took a very detailed tour of UMass Amherst. And of course, you're going to see the school on a beautiful sunny day. But it was very informative. I think they are really, really trying to push the envelope in terms of technology, communication, the graphics, the questions that are answered. I found this to be a real helpful thing given the times right now. And hopefully in the fall, and we get in through phase 2, 3, or 4, students will be able to at least take some type of formal visits later in the fall, when the sense of urgency will certainly be a little bit more heightened. So just to touch on the grading, GPAs, final grades, I know there's been a lot of questions about this, and I don't want to spend a tremendous amount of time on this. These are the numbers that we've been given. And if you do have any questions about the end of the year actual grading system, I really would refer you to our assistant principal, Mrs. Mendoza. But this is the formula for final grades. Basically, quarters 1 and 2 are given the same weight. Quarter 3 is a reduced rate. And students are supposed to be receiving either credit or no credit for term 4. If you go to the next slide, Stephanie. And in terms of GPAs, GPAs are usually calculated in June, and that calculation is based on final grades from 9th grade, 10th grade, and 11th grade. That's the GPA that is usually sent out to colleges between September and probably February, when semester 1 ends. We do not recalculate the GPA at the term break in November. And all that is on the transcript that goes out to schools in the early fall are final grades from those 3 years. And then subsequent term grades will get sent out as senior year moves on. I've told the kids, I've told all the students, juniors, freshmen, and sophomores, put your best effort forward in term 4. The rule of thumb has been if you complete 7 out of 10 assignments, you should be receiving credit for those courses. And there is still some time left for kids if they have gotten behind in that. So again, things just to keep in mind as we move forward. This admission cycle is certainly not unique to Medfield. You know, some students may want to consider, you know, in the old days, we talk about fit school, reach school, safety school. We talk about financially safe schools. We may have a new part of the landscape, and that might be including a test optional school. Medfield students traditionally do very well on standardized tests, but to explore that as an option right now might be one thing to consider. And we've also encouraged the kids to trust the trend lines, not the headlines. Let's try to stay as accurately informed as you can with trusted sources. And the timeline, you know, a number of Medfield students will apply November 1st and November 15th, early action and early decision deadlines. We probably get 70% to 80% of our seniors will apply to at least one school in that early round. This may be the year to extend the process to the regular round, you know, or maybe only apply to 1 or 2 schools that you're really excited about early, and then wait till that regular round, because I can only imagine things will change, and there may be a whole different perspective come January. And again, other things just to keep in mind, please keep asking us questions. You know, things are changing daily. When this whole thing started, Mr. Parker, we'd ask him a question as the principal, he'd say, wait 5 minutes because my answer will probably change. But there is conflicting information out there. I did include this blurb from Boston University dispelling rumors that they weren't going to have students on campus in the fall. This is from a month ago. They have every intention of having students on campus in the fall. And that may change. And I think that is certainly the world that we are living in. And we've just got to be very aware of it and really hone communication skills with parents, with guidance counselors, with college reps, with the teachers throughout this entire process. And I think just to close out my part of this, this was a great letter written by the admissions director at WPI. And he ended the letter with, we are going to figure this out together. And I think it's important that we face these unknowns with good communication and a tremendous amount of patience as we move forward. And at this point, I don't know if there are some questions. It looks like there might be some questions there before I hand it over to Mrs. Padden.
Yeah, there are some questions. So the first one is, does the pre-registration for the fall SAT apply if the student was registered for the March SAT?
That's a great question. From what I read today on College Board, it did not include the March students in that. I believe it was the May and the June students. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'm pretty sure it was just May and June. We're going to give, those students were going to be given priority.
Another question is that someone tried to sign up for the SAT exams yesterday, and the website says that the only exam she can sign up for is June 6th, which is canceled. Do you have any information around issues getting into fall exams at this time?
No issues yet. I don't think the window is open quite yet to register for the fall. I think it does start this week, and I'm not sure if they're opening it up. From, again, what I've been told is you get a chance to pre-register for the fall SATs if you had a May or June canceled, or if you're a member of the class of 2021 and do not have any SAT scores on record. Again, that's what I read today, but I am sure that there are going to be tremendous amount of technical difficulties once they open this window.
Great. And I think there's one more testing question. There are a few other questions related to other areas. So we'll come back to those at the end, or maybe one of the counselors will answer them just within the chat. But the last testing question that I'm seeing here is about the ACT. Someone's wondering if the ACT will offer the new section testing option during the fall exam dates. That's
another great question. There is information on the ACT website about that. I think their plan is to try to roll that section retake out this fall. But again, I still think it's in the developmental phase. ACT has been very quiet with their communication with us. So I would really encourage people to bounce around on their website to see that. There is an infographic that alludes to the online testing and alludes to the section makeup. But I'm not sure if it's 100% in place yet, but we'll try to find that graphic and again, include that on this PowerPoint.
Great. I'm going to go on to my section. There are still a couple of questions in the chat. So again, we'll either answer them at the end, or if one of the counselors wants to pop in and answer them in the chat, take a look at the responses there. So I'm going to talk a little bit, again, I'm Mrs. Padden, Amanda Padden, one of the counselors. I'm going to talk a little bit about different responsibilities throughout the application process. So oftentimes we get questions from students about who sends what and when, and how do all the pieces of the application come together. So as the student is responsible to research schools and create a balanced list. They'll want to ask a teacher for a letter of recommendation. They'll want to complete and submit their application, their test scores, essays, and the application payment. So I think the piece about sending the test scores is sometimes something that students will forget to do. So how they can send their test scores to schools is they can log into their College Board account for the SATs or their ACT account for the ACTs. And there's an option there to send scores. So you can actually plug in all of the schools that you are applying to. And you make a payment, and then College Board or the ACT will send your score report directly to all your colleges. So the two pieces that students send are their own application, and then they request their test scores to be submitted to schools. The teacher will write their letter of recommendation for the student, assuming the student asks and the teacher agrees. And then the teacher will submit their letter of recommendation directly to the college, either through Naviance or through mail. Typically, we recommend that students waive their right to read the letter of recommendation beforehand. And this is because it really shows colleges that it's an authentic letter that hasn't been influenced by a student or a family member in any way. We'll meet with students in the fall to explain a little bit more about how they can communicate to their teacher about their deadlines and where they're applying. And then the guidance counselor will talk with them, with students and families to discuss their list and provide feedback on their list. And then counselors will submit the transcript, which is the document that lists all of the courses that students have taken in high school, in addition to their final year grades. So we'll send the transcript, we'll send our letter of recommendation, and then we'll also send some information about the school. So a little bit of information about Medfield High School, the fact that it's a rigorous high school with a variety of AP exams. And for this class, we'll also be sending some information about COVID-19 and the shutdown and our grading system so that colleges understand how we've graded students during this time. Stephanie, next slide. So going back to resources, like Eric mentioned, the virtual visits are a great way to see a lot of different schools. You know, Anne had mentioned the scattergrams on Naviance. This is a great way to determine if a school is a reach, a match, or a likely school. So as you're doing these visits and starting to build your list, I would encourage your sons and daughters to take a look at those scattergrams and try to get a sense of whether their list is balanced. So ideally, most of the schools in a student's list will be in that match category. And we definitely encourage students to apply to one or two likely schools as well. And certainly if they want to apply to some reach schools, we absolutely support that as long as there are some match and likely schools on their list in addition. Continue to check those individual admission pages. Look out for virtual info sessions, Q&A sessions, opportunities to connect with current students. This website here, the NACAC Status 2.0. So this is a central resource of information about policy changes in admission due to COVID-19. So you can do a search here to learn about all of the different schools that have gone test optional, for example. It's just a great way to get all of those policy updates in one place. Stephanie, next slide. So some other resources, I really love this one, the My Big Future website. So if your son or daughter is feeling a little bit lost in the process, if they feel like they have no idea what college majors they're interested in or careers they're interested in, this is a great website to visit where they can do searches either based on college major or career. So for example, if a student knows that they're interested in business, but they don't really know, what that means exactly or what that might look like, they can go to this website, look up business major, and then that will be broken down into all the different types of business majors that exist. So ranging from marketing to finance, they'll learn about kind of all those different areas of business that might be a good fit for them. And kind of vice versa, if there's a career that they think they might be interested in, they can learn a little bit more about that career, and it'll give information about the types of college majors and preparation that they'll want to have if they want to pursue that specific career. So this is a really great place to start if your son or daughter is feeling a little bit lost when it comes to their interests. I would encourage them to revisit those career assessments in Naviance, like Anne had mentioned. So they took these career assessments sophomore year. If they look at their data and they're feeling like it's not a great description of them anymore, they can actually retake the assessments because their interests and their strengths may have changed since sophomore year. So that's a great place to kind of play around and learn a little bit more about the opportunities that might be a good match for them. As you're going through this process, if your child is starting to express that they're not sure if college is kind of their goal for next steps, or maybe they're not ready to go right away, or maybe considering the state of everything, they're thinking it might be beneficial to take a year off while everything kind of comes down, I would encourage them to visit our guidance website where they can learn about all kinds of different alternate future plans ranging from gap years to PG years to military options. So definitely take a look at that and let us know if your child is interested in alternate plans, because we'd love to hear from them and make sure they're supported in the process. When it comes to financial aid, I know that this can be stressful for a lot of families to think about. So we want to make you aware that the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority, or MEFA, is offering virtual appointments. So these are one-on-one appointments with families where you can ask any and all questions. So they can walk you through the entire financial aid process. They can ask you questions about your own personal financial situation throughout this process. It's a really great resource where you can get your individual questions answered. Stephanie, next slide. Okay, so in terms of the to-do list, so right now I know that every student is kind of in a different place when it comes to future planning. There are some students who are doing those virtual visits, they're excited about future plans, they're really moving forward with it. And there are other students that are just trying to kind of get through this virtual learning, and they're just trying to focus on wrapping up term 4. And wherever your child is in the process, it's absolutely fine. I think there's really 2 things that we want all juniors to do before summer vacation, and that is ask a teacher to write a letter of recommendation. That way the teacher has the opportunity to write the letter over the summer. And then I would either register for, or at least make a plan for when you would like to take the SATs or ACTs, just to make sure you have those dates on your calendar. So if those are the only 2 things your child does between now and summer vacation, that's absolutely fine. If they have some more time, I think going on virtual tours is a great thing to be doing right now, learning about all the opportunities that are out there, and then checking in with their guidance counselor about their future plans. So, if they want to share a list, that's fine. If they want to talk to us one-on-one, we're happy to go through a potential list, really whatever they need. This summer, these are a couple of things to consider. So completing the counselor recommendation form that Kathy had mentioned, creating the Common App account. If a student is interested in music, art, or theater at the college level, sometimes there are additional application requirements like an audition or a portfolio. So as you are kind of building that list, taking a look at what those requirements are is going to help you going into the fall. If you're an athlete interested in playing D1 or D2 sports, you'll want to register with the NCAA Eligibility Center. Another good project is to work on the college essay, like Kathy had mentioned. Some schools will have some supplemental essays that are usually kind of shorter essays. So that's important to take a look at those, just so that students aren't surprised in the fall if there are some additional shorter essays. They can work on their resumes, continue to go on virtual tours, and create a rough draft of their college list. So if they're able to complete those items by fall, they're going to be in amazing shape. When it comes to senior year, this is when counselors would love to check in with students to take a look at their list and give feedback. Oftentimes in the fall, or typically in the fall, we have admission counselors from all different schools come in to meet with MHS students during their reading periods. So if we are in school, we're hoping that is still possible. If not, we're already hearing from colleges that they're interested in setting up virtual opportunities to connect with students throughout the fall. They'll continue to work on applications. I think it's a great idea to kind of make a list of the college deadlines so you know when you need to apply. Typically in September, we offer a financial aid night that's run by NEFA, the organization I mentioned before. So if we're able to do that, we would love to do that again. If not, I'm sure there will be some kind of virtual opportunity to get more information about financial aid. And then communicating with your guidance counselor and teacher about writing a letter of recommendation or about deadlines and just where you're applying in your list. This is a process that we'll go over with students in the fall. They don't need to worry about how to do that, but I think it's just a good idea to keep in mind that as you get closer to your deadlines, you'll want to be in touch with your guidance counselor and your teacher who's writing your letter so that they know you have deadlines coming up. I think that might be my last slide. Were there any questions in this section that I should answer?
I think most of the questions that were in here were still related to SATs and similar things to sort of what have been asked all along for the most part. One question sort of around what we're thinking about for allowing students to have more than the typical 3 days of excused absences to visit schools in the fall. And as I shared in the chat with the person who asked, at this point, we haven't had that conversation, but it's certainly one that we can entertain as we move forward. Right now, there is just so many unknowns about what everything's gonna look like in the fall that the conversation hasn't happened yet, but it's certainly one that we'll keep in mind as we move forward. And another question about sort of how students can access this information. So your sons and daughters have all had the opportunity, I'm not sure they've taken us up on the opportunity yet, but they have had the opportunity to review all of this information through Screencastify recordings that we shared with them through our guidance news and updates that go out weekly. So over the past 4 or 5 weeks, we shared many of these same slides, or very, very similar slides, with all of your sons and daughters, and we recorded our presentation for the students. They do have access to all of these, and this presentation will also be shared with families as we move forward. So they can always visit the guidance news and updates or continue to look at this as well, in addition to having lots of individual conversations with their counselor to meet them wherever they are at this point in the process to help support them.
So I will, we're going to transition now into feedback from senior parents. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to get us started.
Hi. So normally what we do in our junior parent coffee at the end of the year is invite a number of senior parents into, we ask them a bunch of questions about, you know, how their experience was, they having just gone through this with their students, and any advice that they have worth sharing for all of you. So in lieu of that, we sent out questions to senior parents, and they provided us with lots and lots of different advice. We can't share everything, although I wish we could, but we just sort of picked some of the common themes that we heard again and again from these advice. So I'll go through the first slide here. The first question we asked was, how did you organize the college application process? And we had a lot of answers that said an Excel spreadsheet with the key information. So tuition, test scores, location, population, deadlines, websites, so that everything was sort of all in one place. Some people said lots of tabs on the spreadsheets. So that was definitely a popular choice. A lot of parents also said, you know, I let my child take the lead. I checked in to see how I could support them. So we had a lot of variations of that response as well. The second question being, how did you help your child with their list? A lot of responses were around Naviance, using the Naviance search feature and the different graphs that they have to form a list that had a lot of reach, safety, and fit schools that they could then go and visit and then narrow down the list. This one I thought was really interesting. When our son knew what he wanted to study, we asked his guidance counselor for help in identifying those schools and those categories, and then we researched them more ourselves. And this parent said, ultimately, you know, my son needed to own the process, and my spreadsheets didn't matter to him at all. She did go on to say that those spreadsheets were really helpful to her as a parent, but you know, the student wasn't really interested in that. So I thought that was an interesting bit of information from her. The last question I have here, any advice on how many schools to have on your list? And I would say the most popular answers to that was anywhere between like the 6 and 10 number. That's where we seem to get a lot. And you can see on here, you know, the first one they applied to 8, second to 9, third to 7. So I think it's something that's very individual based on, you know, the student's interests, and but that I would say is the average number of schools that they applied to. Go to the next slide. And I think, Eric, you're going to take this one.
So some of this advice, I think, talked about trying to break the process into sections. And I know I've shared this information with some parents in my caseload about pick one day and one time during the week. Try not to jump on them when they walk in the door at 6 at night after practice, saying you got to write your college essay tonight. I think if you say at 11 o'clock on Sunday, that's our dedicated time during the week. It could be a Medfield High School student Monday to Friday and a college applicant on the weekend. You know your student schedules, and I think that's an important part of approaching this proactively as opposed to reactively. It can be a very dark tunnel that a lot of people will go down with lots of questions and analysis. And I think if you have that set time and everyone comes prepared, a lot can be accomplished. And following the lead of the student, I think it's a lot of what the students talk about. A lot of this advice that we got was how much they hear it in the hallway at school and then at home and in the community. You know, and trying to let them drive the bus, I think is critical. And honest conversations. It's financially honest conversations, location, distance, size of school. Some of those are just theoretical to kids in their mind. They've grown up in a school system where they have, 20 kids, 25 kids in the classroom. So to go to UMass Amherst with 350 is going to be a shock to the system. So to be able to have those honest conversations about how they would navigate that, I think is critical. The pros and cons of applying early, for the early decision kids, it's usually mom and dad went there, they're legacy students. They may have some type of a skill, athletic or otherwise, that's being considered in the early round. Some schools take a large number, some schools take a smaller number. Early decisions binding. It comes with a seat in the class, not necessarily financial support to go with this. I think it's very hard for a 17 or 18-year-old kid to decide in September, October of their senior year, this is what I want to do the next 4 years. But we do have a percentage of students that will do that, but we want them to be 100% sure when it comes to early decision. And some early decision schools will give people some generous financial aid packages or merit packages, but usually those are not guaranteed. I think early decisions those are intense conversations to have with the students, with the school, and with the guidance counselor to make sure it's the right fit. And most of the time it is, and a lot of times it will work out. And very few times will it be a situation where someone applied early decision to 2 schools, or a parent's financial situation changed, or a student went and visited and felt as though it was the wrong place for them. But those are very, very rare occurrences. Am I giving this over to Ann next? Amanda.
Amanda, yes. Okay, so how do you find out about scholarships? If you go to the high school guidance website, you can see some information about this, but FastWeb is a great website that you can use. You can make a profile for yourself, and it's a scholarship search site, so you can definitely check that out. Medfield has Medfield-specific scholarships for our seniors every year. You'll learn a little bit more about those in spring of senior year, so don't worry about taking a look at those yet, but those will be offered specifically to Medfield students. And then Google searches for specialty scholarships that applied. So for example, Boy Scouts, somebody mentioned, sometimes different organizations your son or daughter might be a part of may offer scholarships every year. So definitely check that out. And like we said, the guidance website as well. Any other financial aid tips? So one parent said that it never hurts to ask the financial aid office if they can make an adjustment. I think that, their office is going to be there to meet the need of your son or daughter as best as they can, especially if they've been admitted. They want you to be able to come to the school. They want it to be affordable for you. So don't be afraid to ask for flexibility. The worst that could happen is that they won't be able to offer it. Don't be afraid of the FAFSA or the CSS profile. They aren't as horrible as the rumor mill makes them out to be. Like I mentioned, the organization NEFA, if you go to that website, they will give you a ton of information about the FAFSA and CSS profile. They'll really break everything down for you so you can see exactly what they're going to be asking in advance. One parent said, use the price calculators on the school's websites. I found them very accurate. So every college will have a net price calculator where you can enter in some general financial information, and it will give you an estimate of how much you might expect to pay at that school. So definitely check that out as you narrow down your list. Another parent said all schools calculate aid differently. Don't let the price of a school discourage you from applying. You never know what they may give. This is true. I think a lot of students sometimes shy away from the tuition at some of the private colleges. If you really love a school and the tuition is high, it doesn't mean that you will be asked to pay that. In fact, especially if it's a likely college on your list, oftentimes that aid is a lot greater. So don't not apply to a school just because of the price tag. That being said, make sure you're also applying to some financially appropriate schools as well, or financial likelies, I should say. How did you help your child manage disappointment or happiness when decisions were released? One parent said, by being realistic, keeping a sense of humor, and letting them know it will all work out. I think that's really important, just to let your child know that, they're going to get some no's and there might be some disappointment, and that's okay. But ultimately, there should be some options at the end of the day. I let them know that they work very hard and this does not define them. That is very true. The admissions process is not a perfect process. Admission counselors have said to us, we know that we say no to a lot of students who are amazing. And we know we make mistakes in that all the time, and that, we're missing out on some great kids. That being said, it's not a perfect process. They're building a class every year. They have certain institutional needs. So if a student is not admitted to a school, it doesn't mean that they couldn't do well at that school, or the admissions panel, the admissions office didn't like them. It just did not work out at that time. And then lastly, everything happens for a reason. Find a positive spin on all outcomes. So again, maybe your child may not get into their first choice school. Maybe they get into a school a little bit further down on their list, but maybe they go there and they love it. So there's always going to be a positive, and I think as a parent, you're really there to be their cheerleader and to help them find those positive pieces. So I'm going to turn it over to Anne for the last slide of parent advice.
Thanks, Amanda. So one other thing that we asked the senior parents was, what would they have done differently in this process? And one parent shared they felt that their child applied to too many schools, that they would have limited it to 6. So I think we find in our office every year that things sort of run the gamut. We have some that apply to, say, around 6, and then we have some that are applying to numbers in the teens and early 20s, right? So I think what we tend to recommend is that students are doing their research ahead of time, so they have a good sense of what they're looking for, and that they have a couple of schools that might be on that reach end of things, a good bulk of their schools that are probably a really good fit for them, and then a handful of schools that are in that likely or safety category that they'd actually be happy to attend if they were admitted there. Generally, that pans out to somewhere around 8 to 10 schools. Certainly you have to do what's right for your family, but I would encourage you to make sure that you're managing the list throughout the whole process. Another piece of advice was, don't push the essay too much. There are times that I thought she could change a word or two, but it really didn't sound like her. And I think that piece of advice is really, really important. We hear time and time again from admission representatives that they read so many thousands of essays that they can really tell when the voice of the student is coming through, and when it's the voice of a parent or a tutor or an essay that's really just been edited so many times. So certainly lending an ear and guiding and helping to edit, but making sure that that voice stays that of an 18-year-old. And then one other piece of advice, which I think is great, it says, my daughter deleted her Instagram from December to March. I should have done the same. I spent too much time comparing my daughter to the numbers instead of thinking about the wonderful things she was doing outside of the classroom. And I think, you know, you have conversations as you go along, and people tend to sort of get very caught up in this process, but being able to take a step back and really remember that it's about fit and about your child and what's going to be best for them instead of comparing back and forth. It's hard to do, but I think it's a great piece of advice. Another question, what did you wish you knew going into the college planning and application process? And I think hindsight's always 20/20, right? So most of these things say that it all works out in the end. You're somehow able to manage everything. Try not to worry about it so much. Relax and don't let it take over your life. And fit is the most important thing to consider. So I think, you know, there's certainly a theme there, knowing that, you know, things do end up working out, and just making sure that you're sort of trying to keep that focus on the fit and what's going to be best for your child in the long run, and that things will work out the way they're supposed to. And then finally, what was the most helpful thing you did as a parent throughout the process? Piece of advice of not listening to where other kids were applying, so not jumping on the gossip train and having it be the only topic of conversation. Being honest with my child about our financial situation. I think that's a really important one for families. And also sort of going back a couple pieces of advice ago, I think that Amanda was sharing, that it's also important to look sort of beyond that sticker price, to look to other areas of financial aid as well. Another parent shared, I asked where he wanted to go, not where he thought I wanted him to go. I let him drive the process, but set up a structure to keep him on track, checked in on him, and let him come to me when he wanted help. And then finally, a parent who shared that I reminded him to follow his heart. If he could focus on that, he'd make a good decision. So ultimately, making sure that your child is participating in this process as much as possible, and that you're there to help and guide them throughout the process. That's a lot of senior advice, parent, but I think it's all really, really important advice to hear as you're going through the process.
So I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Again, this was a little strange for us since we can't see you. It's like the five of us are talking to each other here. But I feel like our first parent Zoom went pretty well. And I'm pleased with the technology of that. You know, at this point in time, if any of you have questions, please reach out to us individually, reach out to your own guidance counselor. I think it's really important. You know, we provide these programs, we talk to students in classrooms or in groups, but really this is an individual process for your student. And as you go forward, every student is going to be kind of on a different timeline. So it's important for us to really start connecting with students one-on-one so we can see where they are in the process, because where Anne is in the process might be very different than what Kathy's thinking. And that's totally okay. This is a fluid process as we go. Nobody here would ever say that a student needs to come into school in September and have their lists finalized or know exactly what their plan is. Oftentimes we'll meet with kids in September and October who they feel like they have a great plan moving forward. And then we'll come back into our office in like February and say, I've totally changed my mind. And that's fine too. You know, as Eric mentioned before, kids do change their mind throughout this whole process. So we really encourage you all to connect with us, have conversations with your child's guidance counselor. It's really important for us to know so that way we can help counsel and support the kids as well. I recognize at this point that our juniors have got to be feeling kind of a sense of worry and feeling burned out a bit in this whole end of their school year and this remote learning process. The reason why we sent out the Screencastifys was to try not to overload them with information. This was a lot of information that we shared with you all tonight as parents, where I feel if we tried to get students for an hour and a half presentation, they might struggle through it. So all of the screencasts are on our guidance news and updates. Hopefully you folks have been receiving those as well, which they can access at any point. If they need help with any area of the process, again, that's what we're here for, and we're happy to help. So with that, I just want to thank you all again for participating tonight, and I wish you all well and good health. And again, reach out if you have questions. Thanks so much.